I would certainly say my first impressions of her was how incredibly loyal and supportive she was of you and James. I mean, she was fierce in that sense. She was absolutely 100% behind what you were doing. I think, in a sense, it was any friend of my son is a friend of mine, so to speak, so you kind of got adopted. She was clearly very devoted to her family, and that family came to extend to all the survivors and to people like me and Jonathan who were part of your team, so to speak. It was just sort of... I mean, she would have done anything for those survivors. And I think it was, the fact that, whenever you went up, you get this little invitation to come over to Bethany to see her and so on, and Eddie. And it was just that, it was that family atmosphere. And I think she was at the heart of that warmth. What I remember most is when she produced those albums. An album for each survivor, and she sent me one of my involvement with Beth Shalom. And it was just, it was personal. And she had a phenomenal memory as well. Given how many people she came into contact, the fact that she remembered particular details about you always, it was never just a generic, hi, how are you doing? It was always very specific questions. I think with Marina that, in a sense, one of the differences between her and me was she probably had more of a sense of answers that her faith gave her, and the fact that faith could help some survivors, I think that meant a lot to her. But equally, she would never force it on people. It was just she was what she was, and what she wanted to do was to hear where the people were. She had that openness, I think. And that's not easy to attain, to actually sort of, in a sense, have a very strong sense of self, but one that allowed space for others. And what she wanted every woman to be was the best version of themselves. And that's why she was so sort of delighted at her grandchildren growing and stretching themselves. I think she was a great facilitator in certain ways, and I think she quite liked bringing people together. So sort of, she'd invite sort of different people to lunch and so on, who might not be obvious mixes and so on. Because sort of often albeit I would come to lunch with her, which is sort of forcing us to talk to each other to a certain extent. And I think she used her house for that partly, those sort of more informal gatherings. Obviously not that informal when it's about 200 survivors on the anniversary and so on. But certainly when they were smaller. And she certainly loved networking. And sort of making connections between people. Have you heard about so-and-so and things? I think she was I think she was so good, though, at making that house a safe space for survivors, because it wasn't just a Holocaust Memorial Centre, it was about the gardens and the memorials, but it was also about that warmth, and that this is your space. And I think they did see it. It might be a difficult experience because of the nature of what was happening, but it would be in an environment where they knew they were cared for. And it wasn't just they were a symbol of something, they were each people. And those albums, I think, really showed that. I particularly remember her absolute pride in her grandchildren. She was constantly sort of... Every time I saw her, she was telling me the latest, but also she was sensitive enough to remember sort of about me telling her my brother had adopted, so she was always asking me about my nephew and niece. Because I think she had a real passion for the younger generations, because they're the future. Because it's just someone who has total belief in you. And I'll certainly miss seeing those emails in my inbox.